Steph, welcome to the show, man. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. I appreciate it, bro.
Let's start with the most important question for this show, and that is, tell me about your family. I'd love to explore that. By the way, and you can take that wherever you want, because there's your current family, there's your perceived and chosen family, but let's start with family.
Yeah. So, I'd start with the most immediate thing in my life, which is my wife and my newborn child. She's Athena Grace, and she's 8 weeks and a couple of days old. And so I'm very blessed that I get to work from home for the majority of my time. And in fact, even my quote unquote office that I just recently got is just an apartment across the way from me. So I'm always at home, right? And it's a beautiful thing because I'm able to, in between life and business and everything else that I'm doing, is spend time with my daughter and obviously, ensure that my wife's okay and she's doing well and all those good things. And so I have that constant contact. And then, family, man, it's I'm very blessed that I have very close people in my life, friends that I've chosen that aren't blood family per se, but are equally as important and equally as valuable to me. Friendships that I've had for 20 plus years, 10 years, 15 years, all over the world, and particularly men that I really rely on and lean into and just have a very deep bond, no matter how often I'm seeing them, spending time with them, communicating with them, although it is regular, that bond is still very much there. And particularly the family and the tribe that I've co-created here in Austin, and just the amazing human beings that I've met since being in the US. I've been living here for the last 4 years, and this is my home. So much so that I'm getting my citizenship.
Oh.
Yeah, and just really feeling grounded here, and just the connection, the relationships here forged are just so pertinent and so real. And I feel very blessed that I'm surrounded by amazing human beings.
You are surrounded by amazing human beings, from my vantage point. Where did that begin for you, man? Like when you go back in your life, where do you recall beginning to form, especially with other, boys perhaps at that time in childhood, but, male relationships? Who were some of the earliest, most influential, most important male relationships in your life?
Yeah. So to explore your first question first, around when did that really begin, and sort of how? It began when I was probably around 12 or 13 years old. And it really was born out of a need to get out of my household. And my household was very turbulent, very volatile and violent. And I just needed to get out because it was just so intense. And so I forged friendships on the soccer field, on the football field. And I was overweight as a kid. I wasn't athletic as a kid. That came later in my later teenage years, where I really found athleticism and found hormones essentially, and I just started growing, and started losing weight and becoming more comfortable in my body. Although it's been a challenge for so many years, because my initial experience with my body was one of great discomfort and one of self-loathing and not really having a connection to my body, consistently being disassociated because of the experiences I had as a kid. But I forged those friendships, at the age of around 13, and just found great deep meaning and trust in those friendships. And they almost, quote unquote, saved me. And the majority of those friendships that I forged when I was 13, I still have today.
That's cool.
Yeah, from that sort of that age 13 to 15, I would say 90% of them are my closest friends, dear friends. We communicate just via, we're in a group thread like every day. And so, and these men are in Australia still. They're in my hometown where I grew up. I'm really the only one that's left. And so that's where it started. And that's an uncommon experience for men, as you probably are aware of. It's an uncommon experience for men to have close, bonded, intimate relationships with other men. There's so much competition, there's so much comparison, there's so much pain between men, because we've had such a damaging experience with a father figure for most of us at early childhood and developmentally, that it makes it very difficult to trust anyone that's similar to that, i.e. other men.
Yeah.
And so for me, I had to really break that mold. It was so intense and so severe, at least my perception of it was at home, that I had to find refuge in something else, and I did, and I really surrendered to that as a kid. And to be honest, I don't know what allowed me to trust at that level. And there were challenges and complications, but I still lent in. And that just hasn't been. It was a wound for a while, where it was difficult to hold those friendships because there was so much insecurity and desperation. But it wasn't the wound of I can't trust other men. It wasn't that per se. So again, I look at my life and I think, wow, I'm really blessed with, I've had a lot of hardship, but I'm really blessed with some of the hardships I haven't had and how I've made them a gold mine for me. And those friendships are really one of them.
And, today in your work with men, and you work with a lot of guys, and I know some of the guys that you work with, and you're partnered up with some incredible humans. What do you think makes a great relationship, a great friendship, a great brotherhood amongst men now, both in your life and those who you serve? What are the ingredients there?
Yeah. The first for me is range. And so, and then I'll peel all this back. This is how I like to operate. I like to connect dots in this way. So if I say range, so what am I talking about? I'm talking about emotional range. So our ability, essentially, we keep stripping this back, our ability to be ourselves. And so if we're being ourselves, that means we're not only demonstrating and showing our joyful parts or convenient parts or attractive parts, like, hey, how wealthy we are, or how nice we are, or how generous we are, or how kind we are, and compassionate we are, and how empathetic we are, and all those good things, right? And how strong we are and resilient. But we're also going to show the times when we're angry, when we're depressed, when we're sad, when we're despondent, when we've fucked up and we're in low self-worth, when we are in this self-loathing energy, when old childhood stuff's coming up and we're erratic or frustrated or overwhelmed. So our ability to have range and then not judge ourselves for that range, right? But judgment is another part of that range, right? The guilt, the shame, all of that. But then to show that to other men and to have that held by other men without judgment and with compassion and be seen and witnessed in that place, that is a recipe for very powerful friendship. And it's not easy because it comes with a lot of risk to show the quote unquote ugly parts of self. Are they going to reject me? Are they going to abandon me? Are they going to tell me to get fucked? Are they going to leave me as friends? Are they going to talk badly about me? Is it going to ruin my reputation? Are they going to be jealous, with my successes, etc.? So our ability to be full and to be in range also requires us to be in self-worth. Now, to be in self-worth, we have to explore ourselves. We have to have awareness. To have awareness, we have to go back to that exploration piece, but that means we have to befriend and come face to face with all the parts of ourselves. That's not easy. It's not easy to look at self in the mirror and say, I don't like who I'm being right now, or even worse, I don't like me. Or even worse, I hate myself. I hate me. Not, I don't like the parts of me. I don't like this expression, but I hate me fundamentally. But to go through that exploration and become acquainted with all those parts of ourselves, or as many parts as possible, that's part of the hero's journey, right? And that's what gives us the courage and the ability, the willingness then to actually demonstrate these parts that are unwanted by society or are deemed to be unattractive by society, including our friends. Because then, the old patterns come up as well, and we all have different patterns, but I don't want to burden that person. Can they really hold that? Do they need another thing in their lives? I'll just keep it to myself. One of the biggest issues, right, is isolation for men, is loneliness for men, is I'll do it by myself.
Right.
So when you ask that question about, friendships and what creates magnificent friendships, I'm paraphrasing, for me, and there are many other factors, but range, and as I've sort of connected some dots there, plays a massive role in that.
I love that word too. And I've yet to hear anybody put it in that perspective. I'm definitely going to use that, and that's helpful. And I've found that to be exactly what you just said, very helpful, especially in our community. This transparency leads to transformation. We also talk about, in our ethos of engagement, we talk about don't hide behind humility. Some guys are just so humble that they hide there, and that doesn't serve them or the community as well. I'm wondering for you, man, when it comes to what you were just talking about, maybe not accepting yourself, these feelings of like not liking who you are, looking in the mirror and going, I don't like that part. Is as much work as you've done, do you still struggle with that? or have you kind of squashed that? Is that gone? Like,
in Australia, we have a saying, tell them is dreaming, which means no way. Of course, I still have last 24 hours, last 12 hours, right? I was on the phone last night with a financial institution. These are, quote unquote, first world problems, right? Trying to organize something. I just got so frustrated, man. 2 hours plus. I lost my temper. I raised my voice. I was frustrated. I brought that energy downstairs into my living room when I was bathing my daughter. And I looked at myself in the mirror last night, and I was literally seeing my father. And I was just so upset. My wife was disorientated because I move erratically and I move fast, and I have a lot of shame around this. I've got emotion coming up about it. I don't like this part of me. I get angry very quickly. I get abrasive. I'm short. I take ownership of this part, but it really hurts me. And I have definitely shifted from the intensity of what it was throughout my whole life to where I am today. 100%, I've made massive progress. I have far greater mastery over it. I'm able to be more vulnerable with myself with it, but it still hurts, man. That's just one example of many. It still really, really pinches, and it's a lot of shame comes up, a lot of shame. And I see myself, even this morning when my wife and I were repairing a little further, I was still getting defensive. I was still saying, yeah, but it's not at you, or it's not. And it wasn't. And well, that's true, but I wasn't really hearing. Her father was the same. Her father was, aggressive and abrasive, not like mine, but was still like that. So it triggers her, it activates her nervous system. Now she can regulate herself because she's an adult, even though I'm not being like violent and aberrant or anything like that in front of my wife and my daughter. But my daughter feels the energy of that. She's a very tapped in little being. All little beings are. They're moving around in a hypnagogic state up until the age of 7 or 8. So they're very susceptible to the energetics of the environment. Yeah. So I bring that back down, then I feel guilt about that. I'm like, I'm just being my father, and I'm failing as a father. Like the last week, I'm like, I can't soothe her, but does she need to be soothed? I don't know what she wants. I'm just failing as a father. Like I'm not sleeping as much, therefore I'm not as articulate and as on point with her. And man, yes, I still go through that for sure.
Well, I got to tell you, man, even after 300 some episodes and working with hundreds of guys for the last 6 years, it still feels good to know that you are with me, Steph, because I sort of had you on a pedestal. I sort of had you in the Superman role of like, I know most guys have problems, but I don't think Steph does. I think he figured all this shit out.
You got plenty. How many hours do you have? I've got plenty to talk about.
Yeah. No, dude, I have some people say the same thing about me. And sometimes I have a lot of shame around the fact that, God, I've not only been to and hosted every Front Row Dads retreat, but online summits, every group call, hundreds of hours of work, therapists, coaching, just for years and years and years. And sometimes I do shit and I'm like, really, John? Like after all this time still? Holy shit. I did not set this up, and this is kind of divine how it all happened. But I wrote today in a post that I shared, I just wrote, I've had a hard time loving myself lately. Like I genuinely, I've heard people say that over the years, and I'm like, no, I think I'm actually like, I love myself. Like, I think I've healed. And then it just showed up big for me recently. And I had a really hard time accepting myself for who I am. And I know, and I believe that you can't shift, until you accept to begin, until you acknowledge, like, these are all parts of you that are on this journey. And I a very difficult time with the parts of me that I'm not proud of or that I have shame around. And specifically, it's my desire to have approval sourced from outside of me. Like I need my wife to tell me that I'm good enough. And I want to learn how to source that approval from within and not rely so much on her. And I mean, there's a big, long story behind it, which we're not going to launch into now, just because of time purposes, not because I have a problem talking about it, but I know that we'd unpack it, and I don't want to turn this into a therapy session. I want to keep this focused on you. But I say all that, man, because I really want to relate to what you're saying. And I also want to appreciate you publicly for what you just shared. It means a lot. Yeah.
Thank you, man. Yeah, I appreciate that. And the last thing I want is to be pedestalized, you know, or anyone to be pedestalized, because it becomes such a hard fall from grace,
Yeah.
you know. One thing I will take ownership of and what I've become very proficient at is repair. And it's taken me many years, John, many years. I'm 40 years old. It's taken me 40 years. And I'm really fucking good at repair and taking ownership of the trigger or the reactivity or whatever it is. And I don't always nail it, but I constantly come around. And as the years go on, as the months go on, as the weeks go on, I'm able to come around faster. The outburst or the reactivity, whatever it is far less intense usually. And I have more tools to deal with it, to deliberately and healthily channel it, but also give it voice and also go within. And I just want to, you know, honor what you just said a moment ago about the self-love piece. And that's very, very prevalent for me now, just again with an 8-week-old. And I just feel like I'm failing as a husband, failing as a partner, feeling very insignificant in the world, even though that's not true. Like, none of these stories are true. They're not true. I know they're not true, but they don't feel that they're not true. That's the thing. Like, I can't convince myself because I literally feel insignificant. And as a result of that, I feel worthless. And that's the self-love piece, right? And it's tough, man. And it's tough, especially when, you know, we are very accomplished in our fields and we're very adept and very ambitious and very willing and very able. And then this part of us comes through that feels like nothing, feels worthless. What do we do? Like in some moments, we have to stuff it down because the situation asks for that. In other moments, but to revisit it, right? But what we do is we tend to forget to revisit it conveniently. We repress it and suppress it. Or we really sit with it, and sitting with it can be very intense. And sometimes, like for men out there that are listening to this, family men and business owners that are really passionate and connected to what they're doing in the world, their service, their dharma, their whatever they're doing, they may not have the space to sit with it because it can be so intense. And it is a distraction from family. It is a distraction from giving to others, because as men, we want to give. That's our energetic. Like, there's a masculine paradigm is to give. We're not very good at receiving. When we sit with our stuff, we have to receive it. And we're not good at that. We're not very proficient at that because we haven't been taught how to receive. And that's a self-worth thing as well, often passed down from generationally from the male dominant figures in our lives, right? And so sitting with it can be so challenging, but we have to create the space to be with it long enough to extract the value and the wisdom, and then to obviously regulate ourselves again, to be in the world again and be available. Availability is very important. And that's another key thing of friendship as well. A key sign of quality friendship is availability. And that goes for our families too, is to then be available to the things that matter most to us as well.
Mm. You just said something really interesting about sitting with your stuff. And I've wrestled with this, man. In fact, my greatest accomplishment last year was to wake up and not do anything for 10 minutes. Like I you know, because I used to get up, go to work, and then I would get up and go meditate, and then I would get up and go read, and then I would get up to just give to myself first before giving the day. But it was always about getting up and doing something, no matter what it was. Didn't matter what it was.
Yeah.
I wanted to meditate with excellence and do yoga with excellence or whatever. Did you give a shit what it was? Just the hardest thing I ever did, Steph, was wake up and go, I'm going to sit here and do nothing. I'm literally not going to write anything down in my notes. I'm not going to journal. I'm not going to make a to-do list. I'm not going to go get that pen and write the thought down, the brilliant business idea. I'm going to just sit here. Hardest thing I've ever done. But you said in that realm of just sitting with your stuff is about receiving. And that's why it's so hard, because you have to receive your stuff. I've never heard anybody say it that way. That is fascinating to me. Why is it so difficult for men to receive? Is it just because it's the polar opposite of giving, and that's a very masculine energy? Is it that simple, or is there more to it?
Yes, and I think that the biggest, yes, I definitely agree with what you've said. That's part of it. And the other part is that our society defines our value and our worth through our utility and usefulness. And so utility and usefulness, and this is very archaic and evolutionary, so to speak. And I don't throw the term evolutionary around. I'm talking about literally our ancestors, their value, their survival, right, was defined by their utility. Yeah. Like how could they make the best weapons? How could they get the most animal and feed or whatever it was, right? How could they extend the perimeter, protect the perimeter, build shelter, etc.? What value and usefulness did they have to the tribe or society or their band of relationships? And I really believe physiologically that's carried on throughout essentially millions of years as hominoids, but hundreds of thousands of years. And society, as complex as it's become, as fast-paced it's become, has accelerated that as well. And so when we look at big business and we look at global, international business and the connectivity around that, we look at climbing the corporate ladder or in enhancing our status, our wealth, our resource accumulation as well. Like when we're talking about masculine and feminine dynamics and attractiveness, because this all feeds into self-worth. And there are many themes that I'm plugging in here, so I'll do my best to distill it. But for men particularly, it's about how resourceful are we and how many resources can we accumulate. So now we start to look at our value, our worth, our sense of self, and the way people perceive us, which is very important to us, to every human being, is based on our status. And our status and our wealth is based on essentially us doing. We have to do more. And so doing involves giving at some level, right? And so we do, and we get rewarded for it. So we do more, because we love the rewards. And the rewards could be in sex, it could be in sex appeal, it could be in money, it could be in the bigger house, it could be in the senior manager instead of the junior manager. It doesn't matter what it is, right? It could be the $1 million month as opposed to the $800,000 month. So I think a lot of it is connected to that. I know for me it has, like the more I do, the more full I feel, right? And the paradox is the more empty I feel. Like we're talking about masculinity, one of the paradigms of the masculine is emptiness. And this is a really interesting paradox, right? It's like I fill myself up with things I need to do. And when I do all of those things, I feel complete and full. But as a result of that, I feel emptied. It's like ejaculation. How good do you feel after you ejaculate? You're emptied, right? In those moments, if we can tap into that as men and as with our sexual partners as well, we can literally tap into a consciousness that is generally beyond our regular familiar state of consciousness, right? And that's part of that is sex magic. Part of that is tapping into a spirituality that intersects with our physiology. But without going down that rabbit hole, there's an emptiness that we feel. And so one of the ways that we achieve emptiness, think about this. Most men, not all men, but most men would rather be on a mountaintop overlooking the vastness of the mountains and sitting there in stillness and listening to the wind, right? As opposed to being in a dance class or a yoga class with 100 other people, right? And moving their bodies and doing those things. Neither is wrong or right. It's a disposition, right? Most men, not all men, most men will have a disposition to be in the mountaintop. I would say, based on not only my research, my life experience, my personal experience, professional, all of that.
Sure.
And so there's an emptiness that comes with that though, right? And what we're trying to do in a very busy world is bring emptiness into our lives, or the sense and the feeling of emptiness. And if that's attached to doing, then we'll do more to get more of the thing that we actually crave. And part of the emptiness as well is freedom. Freedom's another massive paradigm within the realm of the masculine. And so, yeah, to a long-winded way of saying yes to your question, and there's so much more to it.
Yeah, of course, which is why I look forward to our second interview already.
Yes.
I want to sit with the idea of sitting with your shit. And I want to stick with this for a second because my tendency is to want to run away from this one, but I'm actually going to do the uncomfortable part of it and just sit in this with you for a minute, because I want to go further down this road and say, why is it so important that we sit with this stuff? Why is it so important that we address these things? Because part of me wants to think that what's the problem with just keeping doing things and being resourceful and being of value, and right? And like, why not just stay there? Why do I feel the need to sometimes, like I'm more honorable if I can sit with these uncomfortable feelings and if I can feel into the pain, or I don't have to solve everything. Talk to me about, why do I want to stay there? What are the benefits of that?
So there's two core reasons for me, right? The first is, and I'll answer it in this way. The first is, we often need to do the thing that we're avoiding doing in order to feel a little more complete or whole. Mm-hmm. And so if we struggle with sitting in our intensity or our stuff, then it's probably an indication that we should sit with it a little longer, a little more often, right? But the counter is true as well. If you're one of those persons that defines your value and worth by how much difficulty you overcome, including your internal emotional disparity, then maybe you've got to sit with your stuff a little less. Now, there's nothing wrong. I'll get to the second piece in a moment. There's nothing wrong. I want to be really clear. There's nothing wrong with being resourceful. There's nothing wrong with having $10 million months. There's nothing wrong with getting shit done. There's nothing wrong with being the boss. Nothing wrong with that. What's the come from? Where does it come from? Within self. Where is that intention and that desire sourced from? Because if it's sourced from old unresolved wounding and trauma, then it's unsustainable and it won't serve you. And it will cause massive friction and compensation. You will need to do more. It will get harder. It will result in physical ailment. Now I'm going to come back to the second thing. As I mentioned, two things. The first was what I said around do the thing that you need to do the most. Sorry, do the thing that you're avoiding doing because it's probably the thing you need to do the most. And the second part is I'm just going to come back to what I shared earlier about around range. It's convenient to play lotto and win $100 million. It's a convenient thing to welcome into your life, right? It's convenient to welcome a woman saying, I crave you and I want you. It's convenient when your baby girl or baby boy look at you and say, I love you, daddy. It's a convenient thing to want to have. It's a beautiful thing to have, right? But what makes us think that the uncomfortable sensations that we experience, feelings, emotions, experiences themselves, situations, what makes us think they're not equally as valuable? They may be undesirable, but what makes us think they're not equally as valuable? I lean into a story. I actually don't know the factual. I try to verify this. I think I verified it, but I don't fucking trust what the internet says these days. The buffalo in a storm will pack together and move into the eye of the storm to get through it faster. I really, really appreciate that analogy because there's two components to that. There's the relational component that they do it together and they huddle together. We're relational beings, by the way. From my perspective, I think it's one of the, alongside the advent of language and development of the prefrontal cortex and fire and all those good things and eating meat and all that stuff, and probably psilocybin, the discovery of psilocybin. One of the key ways we've evolved is through relationships and through interpersonal and intrapersonal relating, right? And so I like that buffalo analogy because of that component, but I also like the component of not trying to run away from the storm because that's only going to prolong it. They're probably not going to get away with it or get away from it. But let's just go into it. Let's go into it together and get through it faster. And so there's an element of deep truth to that. And I like to use another story that really exemplifies that. Because we constantly move for the majority of our lives in avoidance of what's not pleasurable and what's undesirable and what's uncomfortable. That's why you hear some of the greats. I'm sure, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt that said this, Walt Whitman, many different philosophers, US philosophers and others as well, and obviously present. And I'm paraphrasing here. If we don't create challenge in our own lives, uncomfortable challenge, undesirable challenge will find us. So I put myself in a cold plunge every day. I train at intensity every day. I have difficult conversations. I address my shame. I look my wife in the eye and say, I'm sorry when I need to be sorry. Like I purposely do difficult things to, when life comes, I'm more resilient and it's not as difficult for me. And so I say that for this reason. If we don't go back to our core wounds that most, not all, very few though have not, but most of us have experienced growing up developmentally during our formative years. If we don't go back to those core wounds and address them and heal them within, and there are so many different processes to do that. Somatic work, therapy, coaching, shamanic work, spiritual healing, energy healing, self-reflective practice, being in nature, moving through very specific trauma in very specific ways through trauma release exercises and so forth. If we don't address ourselves, then ourselves take over ourselves. And what I mean by that is our past patterns take control of who we are. Mm-hmm. And the simple example I'll give, and I'll end on this for this section, is that, you know, when you have a thin gold chain, I'll use this as an example, right? Like, let's say this is really knotted up, and I'm trying to do I'm trying to unknot it. But until I get to that original knot, that core knot, wherever it is, there it is, then it all untangles. Mm. Then it untangles. Our emotional and relational lives are the same. If you're constantly in a relationship and you're quote unquote failing, you keep breaking up and it's the same pattern over and over again, the way you're going to really heal that pattern is by dealing with the infliction point of that pattern and healing that. Mm. That's really powerful for us.
Wow. Thank you for that. I love that analogy of the chain and like, where is it knotted up? And when you can get to the core of that, that's where the release can happen. That's a great visual. I'm definitely a visual person, by the way. Yeah. Definitely a visual person.
Yeah. I looked at it and I was, wow, that's awesome.
Tell me, I feel like we took a look back, we took a look within, taking a look forward now. For you, Steph, what are you excited about, man? What's in focus for you? What do you hope to create? You know, you're on this initial phase of the fatherhood journey, right? You're just stepping into this, and feel like you brought us into your world a little bit there. And I really appreciate that. With so much road ahead of you, what are you calling in, you know, at this present time? Take us into the future for you and what you're hoping to build and create.
I mean, I definitely want to, and I am, really continue to work on my parenthood, how I show up as a father, and what I make that mean about myself, and the type of father and male, masculine role model I want to be for my daughter. That's very, very prevalent for me. And simultaneous to that, and I'll definitely get to my service and dharma and purpose and all of that in a moment. And I'll share something very special to me about that too. But also creating a greater sense of unity in my relationship with my wife, really making it about us and we as opposed to her and I. And yes, her and I can be in the team, but what about the us and the we? And really getting underneath what that language symbolizes for me, and being on the path of that. And it's very, very easy. And I've noticed it's very easy for us to just look after the baby, get her in her routine, and not really pay attention and make time for us. Like, she's very tired. She's not sleeping as well at the moment. She's breastfeeding a great deal, which is a great problem to have. She's got an abundance of milk coming through. And there's a distance between us, and that causes friction. And so how do we not only repair from that friction, but ensure that that distance is less and less and less, right? And making time for us and we. And so I'm very cognizant of that, and bringing that into future version of myself. I often ask a question, and the assumption is that future Steph and future John, future everyone is far more adept and wiser than the current version of self. So I would often say, what would future Steph do right now? And I think about, maybe it's 3 years, 5 years, 1 year, whatever. And I think about the evolution, the leaps in evolution, intrapersonal and interpersonal as well, within self and within relationship and being in the world. Like, what are those evolutions? And then what decision would they make about the problem or the thing that I'm facing that is challenging? And with respect to what lays ahead in the future for me, man, I'm very, very excited about the future. I'm very excited about the present moment. For me, I'm living my best life. Like, I'm very grateful. And I've worked really, really hard, man. Like, I have emotion coming up because I have been I have struggled so much to create success in my world, like external success, because I was so empty inside. I was seeking validation outside of myself, and I was thinking that it would be with the zeros in my bank account and the projects that I'm working on and creating. And now, when I've let so much of that go, I have more wealth than I've ever had, right? I have more love in my life than I ever have. I look at that little girl, man, and when I think of her and how she started to laugh now a little bit, like social smiling, and she's responding to me, man, like what I've created in my life. But it's really been a journey, man. It really has been a journey. And I've healed a lot, and I'm really grateful. Like these tears now are tears of deep, deep gratitude because of what I've experienced. And everyone has their own personal journey around that. And I'm living my best life. I am working on all the things I want to be working on. I'm working on an amazing project right now. It's a legacy project for me. 2 or 3 legacy projects actually that I'm working on. There's Elementum Coaching Institute, which is my wife and I and 2 dear friends, Preston and Alexi, and we have a coaching institute to really help people and help coaches be better coaches based on all of our experience. I've been coaching since I was 18 years old. I've really been in this space for a long time, and we do the things that we need to learn the most. And so I got into coaching because I really wanted to heal parts of me. I just didn't know it at the time back then. I have MPowered Brotherhood, which our aim and vision is to be the greatest and the biggest men's movement on this planet. Right? Like really, really talk to men at the level, meet them at the level that they're at in all the different ways. An amazing project I'm working on. Initially, it's an NFT project, but it's so much more than that. That's just the gateway through. We're creating a whole digital ecosystem that crosses over between virtual reality and real world reality, and really giving people access to community and education and up leveling in all different ways. And there's a tokenomics model around that. It's super, super exciting. And I have one-on-one clients that I work with as well. Like I'm just really grateful for where I'm at, man. And I'm really doing everything that I want to be doing. Just the future for me is just an amplification of that. And then I'm becoming an astute investor where the money that I'm bringing in, I'm really getting it to work for me so I can quote unquote retire in the next 5 years. And what that means for me is that I'm going to still be doing things that I enjoy doing, but I won't have to do them, even though I've never ever done anything that I didn't want to do. Maybe early on, like in my teens and early 20s, but I would always engage in work that would give me income, how little or how small, that I really, really connected to. And that's very important for me. I don't do anything I don't love, I don't care about. Like, there were years there where I was posting on social media and creating content. No one was looking. We get a view, maybe a like, if that, some interaction, nothing. But I would every day live video because it was uncomfortable. Every day post. It was 5 years ago. This is actually one thing that I didn't really want to do, but I somewhat had to do it. 5 years ago, just 5 years ago, I was cleaning toilets, washing cars and sweeping floors for $13 an hour with multiple degrees, including postgraduate degrees. Because I was in a space of healing, deep healing, and in a space of hyper creation coming out of healing. And I couldn't get a full-time job. It was really challenging, but my friend owned a panel beating shop. I was cleaning toilets and just to eat, so I could have some food to eat. And those times they've really forged, and that was very hard on my ego, but they many reasons. I sat in it then, let me tell you. And I was just going back to sitting with stuff as well in a moment, but those times really forged a deeper version of myself and got me to be allowed me to be very grateful. Just one more thing on sitting with our stuff. A client of mine, very astute young man, he asked me this yesterday, and we had a session yesterday. And by the way, this man, he's 23, 24 years old, inspires me massively. His family are basically billionaires. He is not entitled in the slightest. He's a kid to me. I mean, he's a kid, he's a young man, but he is so mature. And he asked me this question about, man, I don't know about sitting with my stuff. Like, when do I sit with it? And when do I regulate myself so that I don't have to feel the intensity? And I said, well, you know your dispositions. Your patterns are either run away or hyper extreme, like get into the thing, drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever. So maybe it's not about sitting with the stuff. Maybe it's actually about being in regulation, calming your nervous system, giving yourself so you can receive, so you don't have to face your stuff all the time with such intensity. Maybe it's just bite-sized chunks. And I just want to say that to the high achieving men that are probably in your platform. Because we see that as a challenge. We see that, oh, well, I'm going to sit with my stuff because it's uncomfortable. Let me do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to be there for days.
I'm going to kick ass at this.
Maybe that's not the thing you should be doing. It's not the thing you should be doing. Maybe it's going to be, and I created like a 6-step cycle for this. It's you're in and out. In trauma and in neuroscience, it's called pendulation. You're in the experience, come out of the experience and be in a regulated present state, and then live to fight another day, so to say.
Man, Steph, we're going to have to really work on getting you to open up, really be transparent.
Yeah,
we got a lot of work to do with you, man. That's all right. We'll stick together. I'll help you.
Thank you.
Dude, I'm just fucking around. Dude, you have brought an incredible amount of authenticity, vulnerability, and power to this conversation, which is what I was expecting truly. From what I've seen and what others have shared with me about you. And I'm really grateful that we were able to take a step forward here in our friendship. I feel definitely like I'm walking away personally with things to think about and sit with and process and then share with other men that I'm going to be in communication with. But this has been a very timely conversation for me. Yeah. And I really, really appreciate it so much, man. Is there anything, Steph, that you want to say to the Front Row Dad community before we get rolling here? Not that there needs to be. I feel like we've said a lot, but I want you to, if there's anything that just is in your heart that wasn't said, I want you to have time to say it.
Oh, man. I mean, I just appreciate you, and I appreciate these men just doing their work. Like, this is just listening to these podcasts and being willing to learn from other men is doing your work as well. It doesn't have to always be really uncomfortable and treacherous, you know. It can be picking up and reading a book. It can be listening to your wife and not being defensive. You know, that's doing the work, you know. And the thing that I really want to say is just to, if we don't acknowledge ourselves as human beings, we don't progress, because we believe that we're stuck in the same place that we've always been. So why would we be shown or exposed or even notice through, you know, our reticular activating system? Why would we even notice blessings in the world or what's next for us? We just won't notice it because we're stuck in oh, I'm not good enough, or I'm not doing enough. I've got to be doing more. Like, the acknowledgement's really important. I find that so important for me when I acknowledge myself, and it's not an ego thing. It's just, you know what, Steph, I'm doing a good job. I'm doing an okay job here. It brings me to the next thing. I don't get stuck in cycles of, well, why isn't this happening for me? Why? Not that that's a great question. The better question is, why is this happening for me, or how is this happening for me? But, you know, I don't get stuck. I actually feel more expanded just through acknowledgement. I think that's something that we don't do enough as men. We don't acknowledge ourselves, and we don't have enough brothers and men in our lives to say, you know what? You're doing a great fucking job. Well done. And we don't have enough men in our lives to say, hey, you could be doing better.
Yeah, so true. Appreciate this, Steph. Thanks for the chat. I look forward to more. I think there's a few things on the calendar where I might be running into you here in person in Austin, which I'm looking forward to. But thank you, man. And I wish you all the best in your relationships, as a father, and in all other areas of life, man. Much love.
Thank you, to you too.